Thank you, Leon, for a very interesting presentation. I suppose you could summarize that as quite a technical presentation. IDS, IFC, BCF, Open CDE. But I remember in the early years of CitA welcoming the IAI to Ireland, the International Alliance for Interoperability, which became Building Smart International. So Building Smart International, the largest international group that focuses on digital construction. They're in 22 chapters across the world, and many of their standards and their training programs are in, I think, in excess of 14 different languages. So it's very important that Ireland engages with Building Smart International. And I understand actually that Build Digital Project are hosting an event in Grange Gorman next month, which is all about learning more about building smart. And certainly it's going to feature in my presentation this afternoon. So what I'm going to do for the next 20 minutes or so is just sort of ground the conversation a little bit and talk about why accelerating BIM adoption is so important to Ireland, and to just give you a sense of where we are in 23 and the direction that we believe in the alliance that the industry needs to go. So first and foremost, I suppose, and I think I mentioned it at the very start, Ireland has been very, I suppose in the past, the government have been quite passive, but I think in recent years, they've become very active. And some of you may be aware that there was an announcement earlier in July, where there's going to be now a requirement for BIM on the Capital Works Management Framework. And this is all part of, I suppose, modernizing the procurement landscape in the construction industry. So this can be very much welcomed. Now, this requirement relates to tier one contracts in excess of 100 million. So that probably makes sense. But, further example of the active work that the government are working on presently is the formation of a National Centre of Excellence in Digital Construction, Build Digital Project, the formation of the Construct Innovate Centre in Galway, which is a broader remit of innovation, and of course the repurposing or the additional programme work that will be carried out in Mount Lucas, particularly in regard to off-site construction. So the government have been very supportive in driving innovation and digital adoption, particularly through the construction sector group subgroup, which is chaired by Mr. Rudden. And so what I want to do is just bring you back to a little bit back to the background to this. Sorry, PJ Rudden, I meant to say. The Construction IT Alliance did a lot of work back in 2015, 2016, when we carried out a global BIM study of all the 27 nations. And from that, we were able to do a more detailed study in Ireland in 2017 and 2019. And we got a real sense of where we were in regard to the BIM landscape, and particularly the great work that's been carried out by the universities across the country. Also, the roadmap was published in 2017. And it was great to see that, I suppose, the four pillars of the roadmap were brought forward into the Build Digital project. But we all know what happened in 2020, and that seemed to kind of slow things down somewhat. So the thrust of our message over the next few days, particularly on Wednesday, is that we need to put an order to BIM in Ireland. It's great to see, for example, the government publishing a roadmap for modern methods of construction. Really, what we're calling for this week is a roadmap for building information modelling in Ireland, which is something that most developed nations have introduced. So from an EU perspective, we're conscious of all the great work that's being carried out and publicised in Europe. We have obviously the handbook for the introduction of building information modelling in the European public sector. There's been various sort of European construction observatory reports, and Ireland has featured in that. And you can see there in the centre of the screen a relatively recent fiche in regard to Ireland's position in regard to national strategy, public procurement, the standards adoption, and so on and so forth. So, we're actually doing quite well. And we're also fortunate on Wednesday in Athlone to have Georgios Polypus from PwC, and Georgios will be speaking about the work of the European Innovation and SME Executive Agency. They've developed, maturity scans, best practice, training guidelines, and interactive handbooks specific for SMEs. And there'll be more about that on Wednesday. So just to fast forward, I suppose, to look at global perspective, it's great to see Ireland, listed as, one of the top 5 BIM influencing countries. Now, we are fortunate to be, I suppose, somewhat attached to the UK in that we're attached to the UKI chapter of Building Smart. But, but I think it's fair to say that Ireland could be categorized as having sort of mid-BIM maturity. It doesn't really compare to what's happening in the Nordics, in that in the Nordics, they are very mature. In some of the countries like Denmark, they actually have laws that mandate the use of BIM on public works contracts. And indeed, I've just finished working on a report with Build Digital, where we looked at the United Kingdom, the Nordics and Australasia, and we were able to kind of, I suppose, collate and gather examples of templates and guidelines and roadmaps from these jurisdictions, and that's going to greatly help us and Build Digital in putting forward a framework of supports for the Irish construction industry. When we're looking at the BIM gathering in 23, we're very much influenced by the World Economic Forum report in 2018, which focused on accelerating BIM adoption. And the 3 interventions that we're looking at, particularly this week, is one of motivation, setting the right motivation for increased adoption of BIM, but also monitoring its use. This is something that was spoken about in the roadmap app in 2017, that the need for BIM adoption to be closely monitored and reported. That's not something that's currently happening here in Ireland. Also, the importance of collaboration, and this idea that we need to really work on a culture of collaboration supported by information management standards in order to provide, better supported projects. And of course, Leon spoke at length about the importance of information and interoperability. And it is that that standard information and those open standards that are needed here. And last but not least, the idea of enablement, ensuring that all the stakeholders acquire the skills, knowledge to support and drive the cultural change that's needed. So this led to the teams for the gathering to be aligned with this World Economic Forum plan. So what we do have since 2013 is a very rich catalogue of published proceedings since 2013. And indeed, the proceedings for 2023 will be published by the end of October. But in those proceedings, we have lots of case studies, lots of papers from the public sector, from educators, from industry. And all of this really has led to this framework that we're going to put forward this afternoon. And the first, from a motivational point of view, it's important that the benefits of BIM are articulated across the entire life cycle. And when it comes to companies, we're not just talking about industry, we're talking about, clients, we're talking about tech companies. So this idea of sort of promoting BIM capability to support corporate growth is so important here in Ireland. And indeed, industry groups, whether they're professional groups or groups like Build Digital, they need to disseminate these case studies and monitor national BIM adoption. And of course, the government have indicated that they will be introducing BIM in Ireland, albeit on a phased basis, but to use BIM for public assets, but also to demonstrate their benefits through pilot projects. Sticking with the theme of motivation, we need to start thinking about BIM as a value creator and not an added cost. I was fortunate enough a few weeks ago to be on, I think it was Midlands 103 FM with Tony Woods from Midland Steel. And that was a real example of a company that, looked at BIM adoption as adding value to his business. So what we need to try and do is develop benchmarks where costs and benefits can be measured by companies so they can see for themselves, the business case for its use. We also need to develop a collaborative industry standard for calculating return on investment for BIM, and that's perhaps something again that the professional groupings could work on, or indeed Build Digital, and also publish return on investment for pilot projects, and particularly government pilot projects. We saw this a lot in the UK in recent years. Also, from a motivational perspective, companies need to look at BIM as the first step in the digital transformation, and to really avail of the national supports that are currently available to them. For example, we've got organisations like Skillnets, Skillnet Ireland. We've got Enterprise Ireland, the local enterprise boards. So really to avail of these supports to help them transform their businesses. We're also calling on industry groups to prepare guidance to support the digital transformation of SMEs, and also for the government to produce and create national BIM guidance for public assets. When it comes to collaboration, we're calling for the need for more integrated contracts and redefining risk and return mechanisms. Of course, companies will now need to respond to the BIM requirements on public works contracts that I mentioned earlier. And indeed, even the smaller companies that might find themselves in large supply chains and larger projects, they also need to prepare for this new way of information exchange. I think also there needs to be a more thorough review of international procurement guidance. We found, for example, on the Build Digital report that we did earlier this year, we found lots of innovative examples of use of procurement. For example, the use of alliance contracts in the UK, and other examples in Australasia and in the Nordics. And of course, there needs to be an increased share of the public works contracts using integrated contracts, not necessarily just introducing BIM requirements into existing traditional linear projects. Early collaboration is key here. It's important that we get not just the contractors involved early, but also the facility managers. So there needs to be a kind of a revision of this corporate culture and processes for increasing collaboration. There needs to be, again, we need to disseminate the benefits of collaboration through appropriate channels. This could be through events, case studies, and also we're calling on the government to introduce true strategic collaboration contracts and supporting guidance. Leon spoke widely about data sharing standards earlier in open systems. So we be calling on companies to seek accreditation for information management standards. There's some great work being carried out by the National Standard Authority of Ireland, and they have a team in place there, and it's possible for companies to become accredited for ISO 19650. We need to actively engage with Building Smart and the Open BIM agenda, and as I said, that's starting to happen now. And we need to develop regulations to protect intellectual property and data ownership. This is obviously a key issue when it comes to collaboration. Last but not least, on enabling BIM capability, skills obviously is so important here. We need to avail of a broad set of BIM skilling programs and supports. Without exception, all the universities in Ireland have introduced BIM programs. But what needs to happen is there needs to be maybe more developed a multidisciplinary approach to BIM use and BIM competencies. So for example, it's important that, and this was called for back in the roadmap app in 2017, that the architectural, the engineering, the surveying, the construction management institutes agree upon a set of common competencies, and then obviously particular competencies for particular professionals. And perhaps even the government could start to mandate BIM integration into third level programs, and not, so in other words, actually try to influence and encourage the colleges to develop these skill sets. Changing behavior is obviously very important. It's not just about the technology. Adopting BIM as part of a change management program is important for companies, that there is an increased focus on behavioral change and the use of BIM by the industry groups. And again, that the government start to integrate information management standards into PwC guidance and contracts. Lastly, it's important that there's a long-term commitment from the government to support SMEs. I think we're starting to see that. I know that Bill Digital I mentioned earlier, and indeed the construction sector group are particularly concerned about the skill set and the capability of SMEs, and it's important that BIM is exploited to develop increased business opportunities and to support the supply chain. So we're going to hear, for example, on Wednesday from some of the larger companies who are working on that. So we need to develop a roadmap for Ireland for BIM and support SMEs, and a much longer term commitment to BIM in public works contracts, and to be conscious that we're supporting and encouraging SMEs to get involved. So just to summarize, we feel in the Alliance that there's a direct relevance to the World Economic Framework for Ireland. The importance of the BIM gathering, other national fora like DigiCon, the BIM Coordinator Summit, all add to the discourse that is required. There is a need for a renewed focus and an order to be brought to BIM in Ireland. I suppose the Alliance were the Secretariat for the National BIM Council of Ireland, but we would be calling for its re-establishment, because it's very important that there's that multidisciplinary input into the National BIM Council is brought back into vogue. The National BIM Roadmap for the Irish construction industry should be aligned to national priorities. It's very encouraging to see the introduction of the BIM mandate next year, but there is a particular responsibility now, we feel, for the construction sector group, Construct, Innovate and Build Digital, to really drive BIM adoption in Ireland. So that's the conclusion of my presentation this afternoon.